Hey, what's going on, everybody? In this video, we're going to be doing my June wrap-up, and I finished 11 books in the month of June, and one of them was kind of this weird gazetteer thing. As you'll see, it wasn't even really a book, so that almost doesn't even count. But so 10 like real books, and 7 of those were for the owls that I'm taking for the first time, like kind of in June and July, because I missed them in April. And that's so in order I can take the newts properly with everyone else in August. But yeah, let's just go right over to the shelf and we'll go over some of the books I read, or all the books I read. And it was a very hit or miss kind of month, I think, this time. But let's just get started. Alright, so let's start with Pagans, the Intertraditional Religion and the Rise of Christianity by James O'Donnell. And this book was divided into 2 halves, which was kind of strange. The first half was kind of a neat, and not necessarily like an overview, but sort of a random mishmash of different pagan like rituals and pagan locations from the Greco-Roman world. And it was just kind of all over the place, but it kind of had a neat feel to it because of that. Just because obviously there's no way you could have a comprehensive sort of list of everything that we know about, especially even the stuff we don't know about. So I felt that first half was pretty good. The second half was more of a traditional sort of history of roughly the late Roman Empire to basically the dominance of Christianity in Western Europe. And that half was just really, really dry, to be honest. Like, even if it's dry for me, it's pretty dry. So yeah, I thought this one was the first half was kind of neat, the second half, not so much. I read in Kindle format Dawn and Damnation. I had started to read some weird westerns, and I kind of liked them, so I was offered to review this one, and I actually liked it a lot. Had a really cool premise, basically like in the Wild West, if you died but you didn't go to heaven or hell, you went to like this sort of purgatory place called Damnation, and it's just full of bandits and outlaws and just like cowboys and gunslingers and mountain men, stuff like that. And they literally have like nothing to do all day except basically gamble and drink and talk smack with each other. So it made for like an interesting read because there's sort of like this legend: if you can go a whole year without shooting somebody, you probably get to go to heaven. But if you get killed before that, you go straight to hell. But it's kind of a legend and no one knows what's going on. But I thought it had a pretty cool premise, and I'm going to definitely be reading the next book of the series, Dead Indian Wars. Alright, next up is a Flintlock fantasy book, and it's Promise of Blood by Brian McClellan, and this is the first book in the Powder Mage trilogy. I read the first book in the second trilogy, Gods of Blood and Powder, in the book of Sins of Empire, and I actually like that one as a first entry in a trilogy more than Promise of Blood. I think I gave Promise of Blood 4 stars. There were just a few nitpicky problems I had with the book, like some prose issues, and also some kind of character problems I felt. But overall, it's still really, really good Flintlock fantasy, as that's what Brian McClellan writes. So I still enjoyed it, and I'm obviously going to keep reading the series. And the next book is going to be The Crimson Campaign. For an Osprey Publishing book, I read Hittite Fortification 1650 to 700 BC by Konstantin Nosov, and illustrated by Brian Delph. And this is from the Fortress series, and it's number 73. I found this one to be a really, really good Osprey Publishing book. The illustrations are obviously magnificent, as they always are. Lots of photographs, that sort of thing. But there's cutaways and diagrams and everything for handmade illustrations, which I find really cool. Lots of charts and maps, like usual. Just an excellent overview. Lots of archaeological sites are explained. And as you can see on the cover, like the Hittites had really impressive fortifications and castles. Like, not really castles. I mean, they had some citadels and stuff, but their walls and fortifications were insanely impressive. And just a really interesting book if you like the Hittites. If you don't like the Hittites, probably don't worry too much about it. But that was the Osprey Publishing book that I read, and I try to read one a month. Alright, so let's get on to the Owls books, and I finished 7 out of 12, and I got 5 more to go in the early part of this month of July. But let's start off with Betrayal at Little Gibraltar, German Fortress, A Treacherous American General, and The Battle to End World War I by William Walker. And I also try to read one World War I book a month, and this is the one I picked for this month. And this book is about, during the Meuse-Argonne offensive, an American division was basically completely mowed down. Not like 100%, but obviously sustaining like huge casualties because they were essentially like raw green recruits, basically. And the battle plan was to have a neighboring general have one of his divisions flank an objective that the 76th Division was supposed to hold down from the front, but that general wanted basically all his forces to push on to another objective quickly so he could make some headlines. And obviously without that division flanking the rear of Montfaucon, that fortress basically, that 76th Division had a really hard time and sustained a ton of casualties basically. And essentially there was a cover-up after, or even during the war, but after the war in like people's memoirs and the press and everything about covering up the actions of that general so that he wouldn't look too bad. And it went all the way up to Pershing, who was the highest commander in he was the commander of the American Expeditionary Forces during World War I. So yeah, it was a pretty big thing. It was an incident I had never heard about, but it just shows that how petty some certain like little petty politics can get in the way, and basically a lot of men were sacrificed for. Alright, next up is The Romance of Tristan, and you guys might know it as Tristan and Isolde, or Tristan and Isolde, depending on the author. This one is by Bérulle, which is one of the earliest renditions of this whole medieval romance. And Bérulle is like a French poet. I think it was either I want to say the 12th or 13th century, but pretty much that's all we know about him. But this love triangle that this book deals with, essentially Tristan goes to Ireland to win Isolde for his liege lord Mark, and he does, but they drink a love potion, and so they have to fall in love with each other too, and obviously that creates a huge mess of a love triangle. And actually this it's believed that this love triangle inspired the whole King Arthur, Queen Guinevere, and Sir Lancelot love triangle. So yeah, it's a short read, and I highly recommend it if you enjoy medieval literature. Alright, for that kind of not really a book thing, I read Pictish Symbol Stones, an illustrated gazetteer. And basically this book has like one essay, and then it's basically just a catalog of tons of, Pictish symbol stones from Scotland. And it's interesting, but there's not like a whole lot of text per se. It's more like just details on the stones themselves. If I can open it. As you can see, it's more like where they're located and what's on the stones and stuff. But they are really cool. But like I said, it's not really a book, but it definitely counts because it's on Goodreads, and that was like one of the requirements. So there's that one. Next up is The Naturalist, A Lifetime of Exploration and the Triumph of American Natural History. Fail. It's The Naturalist, Theodore Roosevelt, A Lifetime of Exploration and the Triumph of American Natural History. This is by Darren Lund, and he had an interesting perspective because he's also basically a museum collector, which means he has to go out into the field collecting specimens, and sometimes that does involve hunting. But this was an interesting take on Theodore Roosevelt. He is known for his conservation efforts and his hunting and his naturalism, basically, because a lot of people portray him just as a trophy hunter, which isn't really a fair portrayal because he really was a naturalist at heart. He did collect tons of specimens and donated pretty much all of them to museums throughout his life, and he actually studied pretty much all the animals that he hunted for various different reasons and different publications, things of that nature. But he did hunt quite a bit, and that it was just a big aspect of his life. But it also deals a little bit with his conservation efforts with starting museums in the United States, as well as his relationships with other naturalists during his own lifetime, as well as his conservation efforts while he was, like for example, when he was governor of New York, and also as president of the United States, in his efforts at making parks and protected resources and all that sort of thing. So it was an interesting book. If you like Theodore Roosevelt or conservation, you probably should check this book out. Alright, I listened to the audiobook of Edith Hamilton's Mythology. I thought I had the book, but apparently I either lost it or I never actually had it. I have some other books by her, but I'm not really sure what happened. But this is a classic book dealing with, when people ask for, a Greco-Roman book on mythology, this is like the go-to book. It's not completely comprehensive, but I mean it's pretty close. I mean, she deals with the Titans, the Olympians, a bunch of minor gods, the nymphs, heroes, legends, Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, things of that nature. She covers a ton of material, and it is entertaining, and I would say it's one of the most comprehensive kind of catalogs of mythological entities from the Greco-Roman world. And I particularly like how she used pretty much all resources. She used, epic poetry, regular poetry. I liked how she included material from the Greek dramatists, the playwrights, as well as other sort of just regular prose writers. So, and that also includes the late Roman ones as well. So she was able to get a huge catalog going and basically explain pretty much most mythological entities from the classical world. So highly recommended if mythology is one of an interest to you. Next up is The Legend of Sigurd and Gudrun by Tolkien, and this is essentially his own kind of retelling of the Volsunga saga, which, if you guys know, is like a really old Norse epic poem, basically, about the Legend of Sigurd. And I would say his poems, he's got two main poems, basically, the Lay of Sigurd and the Lay of Gudrun in this one. I mean, they're okay. I don't know too much about the original in the original languages and stuff to verify how well his prose is as a translation or his own rendition, basically, because he uses both the Volsunga saga as well as the poetic Eddas and things of that nature from other Old Norse sources to make them kind of a fuller account of the Volsunga saga and the characters involved. So it was kind of interesting, but this book was kind of all over the place. At first, you have some random essays on pretty much different things regarding either the Volsunga saga or Norse culture and stuff like that. Then you have one of the poems that he sort of wrote out, and then you have a commentary by Christopher Tolkien about that poem. Then you have the second poem, and then you have a commentary on that one, and then you have a bunch of appendices, which are just more essays on different things about the Volsunga saga, things of that nature. So it was kind of all over the place, and to be honest, I'd rather just sort of read the original sources anyways. So I'm not even really sure what niche this is supposed to fill. I think it's just for Tolkien fans who want to read other things that J.R. Tolkien wrote. I mean, it wasn't bad, but it just wasn't anything special, to be honest, that I felt. Alright, and lastly, we have my favorite book that I read this month, and it's When True Night Falls by C.S. Friedman. And this is the second book in the Coldfire trilogy, the first one being Black Sun Rising. And I just love this book series. You have some of the problems with the first book, some are still present, but a few of them are taken care of kind of in between the books, and they're not present in this one. So that was a big plus. Plus, the characters are awesome. Gerald Tarrant is literally one of the most badass characters ever. I think the characters, especially in When True Night Falls, are awesome. Gerald Tarrant is definitely one of my favorite characters of all time now. Essentially, he's super evil, but he fights for the good cause for pretty much selfish personal reasons. Basically, he doesn't want to die, but he's at the point where he literally lives off people's fear, almost, if that makes sense, raw fear, to a certain degree. But anyways, like I said, he's awesome, but the whole ecosystem of the environment that these books take place in, they take on another planet called Urna that humans had colonized. at some point, but then they kind of like reverted technologically backwards. But on Erna, there's a thing called the Fae, which is part of like the ecosystem, which is sort of how sorcerers are able to use magic in this world. It's kind of complicated and it's kind of vague, but I kind of like it that way, to be honest. But it's literally part of the environment, so in certain locations you can't really tap into that power source. For example, like if you're over the oceans, things of that nature. But it's really cool. It's just a really interesting concept. And for example, this Fae stream basically is part of the like environment, like I was saying. Pretty much your emotions can alter it, except that's pretty much only your negative emotions at this state of the books. Only like things like fear and anger and stuff will manipulate the Fae and manifest like monsters and abominations like in other places in the world. Like literally, so if you're too scared, if you have like a group of people fearing for their lives like out in the wilderness, that their like collective fear will actually manifest like something like really horrible. It's not really quite clear, but kind of nearby, essentially, that they would have to deal with in just a little bit because of their own like fear. So it's kind of like a really vicious cycle. It's a really, really interesting concept, and I would not recommend this to people that need everything like neatly wrapped in a bow, because it's not like that. But I really, really, really enjoy the series, and I'm excited to read the third book and the finale, which is Crown of Shadows. Alright, and so there are the 11 books that I read this month. I'm going to try and read a few more in the month of July, and then read a ton in August for the newts. But overall, it's still pretty a pretty good month. Tell me what you guys think down below, if you've read any of them, or you have questions about any of them, if you liked them or didn't like them. I'd be glad to talk to you about them. And whatever you're reading, always remember, read victoriously.